Everyone, so here we will be in order to introduce our Dynar tutorial, we want to I want to let you see how we derive the different equation of our system that we'll be using in Dynar. Okay, so we will here do it for the flexible price model. So that's an economy that is relatively similar to the real business cycle model that is a classic Oswald, let's say, in macroeconomics, but it's strongly different from this framework in the sense that we will add some features to this framework that will make it quite different. Okay, we will add the possibility actually of for the household to hold money, and money that will have some interest for them, and we'll also add some monopolistic power in the supply side that will have as a consequence to make it possible to price to vary in this economy. Okay, so that's the main idea of this model, this world that we will create together. So first of all, let's start from the firm perspective in this world. Okay, let's see just the firms part for now. So we have multiple firms, but we have one single firm that produces the final goods. Okay, that the household will consume. This final goods is produced in perfect competition. So that means that the final firm consider the price as given, like it is exogenous in the eyes of this final firm. The main idea is that we will get a price that will be basically a price of the final good that will basically an index of all the price of the varieties that enter this final goods production, in a sense, right? So we have this perfect competition hypothesis. We do another hypothesis for the final firm, is that she used CES technology to produce the final good. So the CES technology is a bit broad. It's an equation that takes into account a broad family of production function. So it will look like this in our case. We have the final production of the production of the final goods. Yes, the output, if you prefer. That will be equal to a sum, if you want, or an integral. So here we will consider a continuum of varieties, so that will be between 0 and 1. But you can see this integral a bit as a sum of the different the function of the varieties that we will be considering. So this integral of epsilon ti, so epsilon ti is basically the input used in the function. Yes, so the variety I use in the basically, yep. Exponent epsilon minus 1 divided by epsilon. You close the brackets. Exponent epsilon divided by epsilon minus 1. Okay, so that's the Dixit-Stiglitz framework a bit. So basically, this function is designed such that this epsilon actually measure is the elasticity of substitution between the varieties inside this production function. Okay, so it includes a lot of cases. It's just that this elasticity is constant. Here, that's a strong hypothesis, but the main idea is that with that you can take into account the Cobb-Douglas case. You can take into account different level of substitution, like if it goes toward infinity, you basically come to the perfect substitute case, right? You have just a sum. If it goes toward, if it goes in the opposite direction, you are more in the case of goods that are perfectly complementary. Yes. So here, for the sake of simplicity, we will assume that there are some substitutability between the varieties. Okay, we will assume that this elasticity is higher than 1. Yep. Okay. So that's the beginning of the of the thing. So of course we make the hypothesis that the firms are optimizing profits. So that means that they maximize the price of the final output multiplied by the final output minus basically the costs, the cost of the total cost that she has. The total cost is of course the sum, in a sense, of all the varieties multiplied by the respective price. And here, when we say the sum, it will be the integral, of course, between 0 and 1 of the price of the variety I multiplied by its use. Okay, so that's it. Such that, of course, we have here the production such that, with as a constraint the technology. Okay, so basically at the end, as we are in perfect competition, the firm just choose epsilon t, that is the production. Yep. Okay, so we can rewrite this optimization process as this to include directly the constraint inside our optimization problem. Yes, minus the total cost. Okay, so that's our problem basically. So we will have one single first order condition here. We just take the derivative of this expression with respect to the final output, epsilon t. And what we obtain here is basically pt, that is exogenous in the eyes of the firm, multiplied by or epsilon, or the function inside the brackets, exponent is minus 1. Yes, so basically cancelled out here, and you will end up with 1 divided in eta minus 1. Yep. Multiplied by the derivative of the function inside the bracket, so multiplied by basically epsilon I, so the specific variety we are considering here, exponentially epsilon minus 1 divided in epsilon minus 1. Yep, so again this will cancel out when we will end up with minus 1 divided by sorry, I said eta epsilon, yeah, epsilon here. And so we have this, and we have of course after that the derivative of the total cost, that is just basically the price of the variety here. Okay, now that at the optimal level this is equal to 0. Yes. Okay, so that's basically our optimization rule from the firm, the final firm perspective. And so at the end, if we arrange this, we find basically that this is just the production function, but exponent 1 divided by eta. Yes. And so at the end, this optimal choice of the final firm make this demand function of basically the firm that is equal to this multiplied by the price. Okay, so basically if we put out this term, we get the Frisch demand for the goods, right? That will depend of the price of the variety, of the price of all the other varieties that is entering there, and so the price of the final goods indirectly, and here of the use of all the other varieties. Okay, of the demand of all the other varieties, basically. Yes, so that's what we get here. So now that we covered the final good part, we will go to the intermediate firm part. So here we will consider that each firm is in monopolistic competition on its own variety. Okay, so there is one firm by a variety, yeah, a continuous of firm in a sense, and each of them is in a monopolistic competition in its own variety. Yep. So it implies that they are a price setter, which means that they know in these two equations, yeah, they know that by changing their production epsilon ti, they have an impact on the price, PTI. So in their optimization process, we will consider this function 2 instead of an exogenous price that the firm is unaware that she impacted. Yep. Okay, so let's consider the maximization of profit in this case. So now another assumption that we will do is that this firm, they have a concave technology, basically. So it means that epsilon ti will be equal to some function with eventually TFP factor inside. So a total productivity factor terms, but also of NTI. Yes, and we will consider that it is concave in NTI for the sake of avoiding some exponential corner thing. Okay, so that's what we have. Okay, and now we will so the firm optimize its profits, maximizing PTI, yeah, multiplied by the production minus the cost, and here we see that we only have one factor of production, that is labor coming from the household, so actually minus the wage associated to the people working the sector I multiplied by the amount of labor. Okay, so basically that's what we have. And so the thing is that now indirectly inside this term, yep, we know from equation 2 that this is a specific function from 2 of this is a specific function basically of the production, and the production is it himself, yes, a specific function of well, maybe I should not use f because I already used that. I will use, I don't know, g, that is itself, yes, at the end of the day, a function of nt. Okay, so that means that at the end of the day I only have NTI in the decision of the firm, right? So we can reduce this problem where the firm was choosing the quantity and the price, taking into account that by changing the quantity she also changed the price. We can reduce this as a choice of the labor allocated in this equation. Okay, the optimal labor that she fixed at the end. Okay, so that's how it works. So now that we are optimizing our profit, we can just take the first order condition coming from the labor side. So let's take the derivative of the profit, yeah, of the firm with respect to the amount of labor that it used, and we know that this is equal to 0 at the optimal, right? So basically, first let's be interested in that. So basically that's at the end, it means at the end we know that from this expression, because you have nt inside a function that is inside another function, it means basically that the derivative of this price basically with respect to nt, sorry, with respect to nt, basically we know that this price will change according to the demand, and the demand itself changed thanks to the demand, sorry, the production, the demand from the final firm, and this demand will actually change with respect to the price. Okay, so that's basically what we ends up with respect to the labor. Sorry. Yes, that's basically how it works. So here we have just the production that change if the firm put more labor inside the production function, and this has a direct impact on the price here. So that's what we get from the profit. So we know that this is basically negative, right? Because it depends negatively on the price from basically our second equation. Yes, or equation 2. And we know that from our production function, this is positive. Yep. That means that basically we decrease our profit by increasing the price if we produce more. That's the idea behind that. Okay. And we multiply this, of course, by the level of productions, because we do that on all the. It's of course a decrease in our profit on all the. Because we decrease the price for all the variety the firm is producing, we know that basically we have a decrease of the profit multiplied. The decrease in the price is multiplied by all the level of production. Okay, it's a decrease of the profit on all the things we are selling because the price decrease. Okay, and then there is the positive. So basically, this was just the derivative of the price. Yeah. With respect to labor, and of course then we multiplied it by the level of epsilon t from the classic derivative formula, and now we have to add, because this is a product, plus the derivative plus PTI multiplied by the derivative of the production. So that will basically give us this price multiplied by the derivative of the production with respect to labor. Yep. And so basically this is positive. Yep. Multiplied by something positive. So that's basically just the profit the firm receive from selling one more unit if it produces. Okay. So it decreases profit on everything in the left side of this equation, because by increasing the production it has a negative impact on the price. But at the same time she sells one more unit. Yes, so that's basically that has a positive impact on profit. Yeah, and so we know that at the optimal level, this must be equal to basically this must be equal to the wage, basically. Yes, that I would in capital letter. That is must be equal basically to the cost. Yes, to the cost of wage. So the marginal effect of one more unit of wage must be equal to the cost of the marginal benefit, the marginal benefit in profit coming from an increase in the labor must be equal to its cost, basically. That is the wage. Okay. So that's the main idea. Yep. So now from the equation above, it's pretty logic, and you can compute yourself. But basically, just you will see that this epsilon is basically what we got, but just in a simpler way, because we know that this epsilon is the elasticity of substitution. Yes, we can a bit arrange the thing, knowing that this eta, being the elasticity of substitution between the variety, we know that this eta is basically minus the change in the demand of the variety I with respect to its price, multiplied basically by its price divided in the demand. So basically it will be equal to the change in it will be equal to the change in terms of percent of the demand if there is an increase of 1% of the price, right? That's just what this equation is about. And so from the equation we have from the first order condition, we can basically rewrite that -1 divided in this epsilon. Sorry, I still call it eta for some reason. I don't know why I have this bias. So -1 divided by epsilon multiplied by the price. Yep. Multiplied by the derivative of the production with respect to labor. Plus basically the price, the level of price multiplied by the margin, by the derivative here of the production by the labor. So basically the marginal, the marginal productivity of the labor, right, must be equal to the cost of labor. So that's what we get. So we just obtain by considering this formula and plugging it there. Okay, that's basically just what we did. And so what we obtain at the end from this is that if you consider that this basically as the marginal productivity, as it is how the output how the production increase if we had one more unit of labor. Well, at the end you just got that the price of the variety multiplied by -1 divided by the elasticity of substitution plus 1, yep, must be equal to the wage divided in the marginal productivity, that is this derivative of epsilon ti with respect to the derivative of nti, right? So let's call in basically just the f prime, or production function f prime with respect to n, yep, of nti, basically. That is just the marginal productivity coming from our production function. Okay, so that's what basically we obtain from there. And what we see basically is that what we got here, yes, what we got in this term that you are seeing, oopsie, sorry. What you get from this term that you are looking here, it's something pretty interesting, because it is basically the price, yes, the marginal cost of labor actually divided in the marginal productivity of labor. So basically you are dividing here the price of the factor by what it brings in terms of production, yes. And what it means at the end, it's so we can rewrite it, so it will be clear from the perspective of the course that the price of the variety is just equal to theta divided in theta minus 1, yes, multiplied by this function, and that is basically the equation that we'll be using, yes, that we are using in the model. Okay, so that's one of the equations that we were basically using. So that means at the end that well, I don't know at which number I was. It was only at 2. Yeah. So that's typically how you can obtain one of the main equations of our model, right? That define our system from the optimization of profits problem. Okay, so that's the equation we will be using that we managed to derive. Yeah. Okay, and so of course, let's not forget that this is basically the marginal costs of the variety I. Because it's basically it costs but divided by the number of the number of product, the increase in the production related to this unit. So you have the cost of one unit divided by what it brings. It's basically you can consider basically as the cost of producing one. You can consider this ratio as the cost of producing one more unit. You know, in a sense. So that's why you see this expression in the Dynar tutorial. Okay. Okay. And so what you see is that in this world there is a markup on the marginal cost from this competitive competition that you are assuming. Yep. The price will be higher than the marginal cost, which was not the case in the more simple model, if I may say, that we covered. So here we have our equation for the price of the firm, of the individual firm. I mean, it will be the same equation, we will show it, than the one of the price index, the one of the global price index of our economy. So if we want to look at that, we have to come back to the final firm, knowing that in the long run, because of perfect condition, the profit of the final firm are equal to 0. Okay, so basically we can just write that the profit PT multiplied by epsilon t minus the sum of the price of the variety multiplied by their level of use by the final firm is equal to 0, which means that we can just isolate PT that will now be equal to the sum of the price of the variety multiplied by the amount used of the variety divided by the output. Yep. So that's the expression. And now what we will be using, we want to plug basically the demand here. Yes, this demand expression of the variety. So we just want to replace this epsilon ti inside our equation using this result that we had from the optimization process of the final firm. Okay, so that's what we do. And by doing it, we obtain then the price is equal to this expression multiplied by PT, I exponent minus epsilon multiplied by the price index exponent epsilon multiplied by the amount of production divided by the amount of production. So that cancels out, of course. And if we continue, then we obtain this expression where the price index is basically equal to the sum of the price of every variety exponent 1 minus epsilon exponent 1 divided by 1 minus epsilon. So that's the classic price index of the Dixit-Stiglitz framework, right? Here we can go a bit further in that model because we know that all the firms are identical. They share the same technology, it's just that they produce a different variety. Okay, so from this hypothesis that firms are identical, we know that PTI will be basically the same for each variety. Okay, so that means basically that at the end you obtain that the price of the final good is equal to just PTI exponent 1 minus epsilon exponent 1 divided by 1 minus epsilon. Okay, of course this cancels out. And an interesting result from the fact that we use a continuum between 0 and 1, so it's basically that the price of the final good is equal to the price of the variety. Okay, so that's basically our final result. We were at equation 4, and we just plug 4 in our third equation, yes, and you obtain basically that the price is equal to this expression, so epsilon divided in epsilon minus 1 multiplied by the marginal cost. Okay, so that's how we go from the price of the individual variety to the price of the variety to the aggregate price index. So now that we have basically our price index, so what we still see basically it's the same as the variety. This is basically higher than 1, right? Because the elastic substitution is higher than 1, and we call that then the markup, of course, because it means that it will be the price will be higher than the marginal cost of a variety. Yep. So it is not very highly surprising that the price index is the price index is higher than the marginal cost of a variety. Yes, that's not very surprising. Surprising here, it's from the basically this monopolistic competition that we had, and what you notice directly is that the higher the elasticity of substitution, at the end the lower this markup. Okay, basically it means that you have more competition in a sense between the varieties, if it is the case. So it will decrease the markup. Okay, so that's our final expression. So if you consider the final good as the numeraire, you can make that equal to 1, and then have the expression of the marginal cost that we covered during the lecture, that is equal to epsilon minus 1 divided by epsilon, if you need to. Yep. But so at the end, from the development we just made together, we know that from the supply side, we have basically two main equations that we will use. Is this equation, so basically the marginal cost, yep, that will be equal to epsilon minus 1 divided by epsilon multiplied by the level of price that we can eventually normalize. And the second, of course, equation that we use is basically what's inside this marginal cost, and this marginal cost will basically depend of the productivity of labor and the price of labor, of course. So it will be basically equal to wage divided by the derivative of the production function with respect to labor. Okay, so that's the two equations that are coming from the supply side that we will be using here. Right? So okay, now let's turn to the demand side. Let's close this. So here, what we need to complete this world is to consider now the individual, right? We will still be considering an optimization process. So the consumers, basically, the household, they maximize their utility. And they can maximize by playing on three specific dimensions. First is consumption as usual, but they can also have bonds. So the bonds is basically a bit like giving some money to other individuals in order to get some interest on this. And also we will make a specific assumption. We will be in a money and utility world. That means that consumers enjoy to directly own money. Okay, they like to have money. So we can consider that in many directions. One of the possible direction is to think it as a consumer as wanting to have some cash in case something happens. Yes, you can a bit rationalize this that way. And so they optimize their expectation because here there are some uncertainty. That means that the individual are maybe not necessarily aware of, do not exactly know what tomorrow will be, but they have expectation on it. So everything that is this ET multiplied by the brackets means the expectation of everything inside the bracket. They optimize on an infinity of periods, beginning in t, basically, between I equal 0 and the infinity, multiplied by beta exponent I. So beta here is a parameter of preference for presence, okay? So basically, if you are considering utility in a period that is very long, it will be considered by the Husserl here as lower because beta is between 0 and 1, yes. And due to the fact that it exponent I, if we go far in the period, it will be always related to lower term here, right? So that's the idea. So that's basically a parameter to allow for preference on present. That is actually a necessary condition to have a stable equilibrium at the end. Yeah. Multiplied by, so we will consider here a specific utility function that will be basically the utility of consumption, Ct plus I. Yep. A disutility from labor with a function called v, okay, of the labor, plus a utility, I will call it um, of the money that the household hold on. It's in real term, okay, it's real money, so it's divided by the level of the price. Yep. So that will be our utility function. So we will consider that the v function is convex and that the u function of consumption and money is concave to avoid some corner solution. Okay, so that's the hypothesis we make. So here we have the utility function. We have now the income constraint, and from the income constraint, well, what our consumer can either consume his income, either buy bonds, doing it. We will consider everything in real term here. So I divide by PT everything. And he can also keep some money basically. Yes, so that's the three things our consumer can basically do. We know that this must be smaller or equal to the total income, and the total income is equal first to the money that we receive from the bonds we had basically the day before. So that's the gross marginal interest rate that we will call RT here, but at the previous period, RT minus 1, multiplied by the bonds that we had at the previous period, and because we express this in real term, is divided by the price at the current period, of course. Yep. Plus the amount of money that we had at the previous period, because we still have this money and one can still use it, right? Divided by PT still. Plus the wage that you obtain, that is basically the amount of labor that we decided to have multiplied by our wage, that is expressed in real term. Yes. And we can also have, actually there are two terms that will not really enter our equation but that are also present. We are here what I will call the real profit of firm. Yes, because we can consider that our individual has also some owns the firm, such that the profit that are realized by the individual firms is not destroyed in this economy, does not go to the Bahamas, let's say, it's enter again the economy. and we can also add a term for the tax that we call TT. Okay, so that's basically in the right side the total income, yep, of the household, and this is the total expense of the household. And of course, we know that this will be equal, right? Okay, so that's basically what we have. And now that we have that, we can just take the Lagrangian of this expression. So the Lagrangian is a bit dirty, but we have then the expectation on beta. So of course the sum. Sorry, the sum of all this expression between 0 and the infinity of the expectation of beta exponent I multiplied by basically the utility of the household, okay? And now we may counter using the Lagrangian parameter that will be basically the shadow price, lambda t plus I, multiplied by the constraint. So note that, I will use maybe more a normal parameter. Note that the constraint is also multiplied by our beta parameter here, right? Because the principle of reason does not only apply, of course, to the utility, but also to the constraint across time, right? So basically, we can consider here that it is a plus, so it's the income that I have to put first. So this is here the real interest rate still divided by pt plus I multiplied by rt plus I minus 1, yep, plus mt plus I minus 1 divided by pt plus I, plus the wage minus the tax minus then the consumption, yes, minus the bond minus the money. And of course, I forgot to add the real profit, but it will not enter our equation anymore. Okay, so that's basically what we have here. That's our Lagrangian. That is a bit barbaric now, but that will soon will not be that difficult to use. So now we will just compute the first order condition that are the condition for the maximization of utility from the household perspective. And here we take first the derivative of the Lagrangian with respect to consumption. Yes, that is equal to 0. So basically from that we see that consumption is only entering here and here, right? So at the end what you obtain is just that the derivative of the utility function with respect to consumption, yes, of this small u function is equal to the Lagrangian parameter. Okay, so that's basically what we obtain if we derive with respect to the consumption at one specific period. So that's our first order conjunction. We know that the Lagrangian parameter must be equal to the utility of consumption, the marginal utility of consumption, sorry, which actually is quite logical when you think to it, because what is the Lagrangian parameter in an optimization problem? Well, this Lagrangian parameter is basically how your optimized function change if you relax your constraint by 1 unit. Okay, so it's how your utility change if you get 1 more unit of income, of real income here. And of course, here your real income is basically 1 more unit of consumption. Okay, so it's not very surprising that the Lagrangian parameter that is sometimes called the shadow price, you will see why, of this problem is equal to the marginal utility of consumption. Yes, it's basically the utility that you get from one more unit that you can consume. Okay, so that's the main idea behind this expression. Now let's take the derivative of the Lagrangian with respect to the bound. That is the second factor. The second things that Husserl can do is just to borrow or lend, to lend some money. Yep. So that's what he here borrow. So that's what we here that's what we obtain when we do that. So where now bounds are entering no function, well, you got them mostly in the constraints, so they enter here typically, yes, and they also enter. Sorry, I noticed that I made a small mistake. Here it's of course B. It's not it's not R. Sorry for that. But so it is basically entering here and here, right? So we can directly compute the derivative of this part. So we'll have basically beta. Yeah, that is entering. So I did not talk about beta before, in the sense that we had the beta exponent 0, so it was just 1. But even if you will take it at another period, for example, at the next period, you will have also the same beta here. So they will cancel out, okay? That's why I did not talk about the beta before. But so here basically beta, of course, enter in the sense that now we'll have basically the bounds at the next period when you are choosing them. Okay, so that's why I consider here the beta. Now we have also the we must multiply them, of course. So basically when it is bt, we know that it is a moment where I is equal to 1, yes, because it's bt plus I minus 1. So the thing is that now you have in your equation a term that is at the next period. So that means that technically you have to add the expectation thing, because we know what is at the current period, but we don't know what is at the next period. That's why the expectation is term is here, okay? Multiplied basically by the real gross rate divided by the expectation on the price as the next period. Yep. Minus beta exponent 0, so that's cancel out of the Lagrangian parameter at the time t divided by the price. Okay, so that's basically here you have the part related to beta t plus I minus 1. Yep. And here you have the term related to beta t plus I. Yes, in our equation. So the expectation, I just put them on variables that are determined in the future, because we know that at the current period, the household only know what is at the current period. It doesn't exactly know, but it has some expectation on variables that are determined at the next period. Okay, so that's what you obtain, and we know that this is equal to 0 at the optimal. Yeah, at the optimum. So from that we can consider basically that that you have just the marginal utility of consumption, that is basically a Lagrangian parameter, that is equal to beta multiplied by the expectation at the time t of the marginal consumption of tomorrow, basically, yep. Multiplied by at the end, in a sense, multiplied by pt by the inflation, the inflation, the inverse of the inflation rate, yep, and all of that is multiplied by RT, the interest rate. Okay, so that we obtain, that's the second equation. And we will maybe stick to that until now. We can go a bit further maybe and consider that 1 divided by the real interest rate then is by definition equal to beta multiplied by the expectation of the ratio of of the marginal utility, yep, multiplied by the ratio of the price. Okay, so we can express it that way if it's a bit easier, later. But now, so what to say basically from this expression? So in a sense, you can consider our second equation as a price, a marginal benefit equal marginal cost equation. In the sense that, what is this? Yep, what is this expression? So we know from one that this is, we know from the equation 1 that this is basically the marginal utility of consumption at the current period. Yes, and we know from the same equation that this is the marginal utility of consumption at the next period. Yes. So basically, the left part of the equation is what you lose if you decide to give 1 unit of income to another to other person in order to get an interest on it. Yes, because you cannot consume this unit. So what you lose is basically this lambda t, or the marginal utility of consumption at the current period. Okay, so that's the idea. That's why we sometimes call it the shadow price. It's in a sense the price of investing. Yes, of investing 1 unit of income to get more income at the next period. Yes, so that's why we call it the shadow price generally. And so to be at the optimum, it must be that this loss that we do by investing is equal to basically what we get from the investment. And what we get from the investment, we get basically this interest rate. Yes, multiplied by level of consumption. And what we got here is that, well, maybe that the price did change a bit. Yes, so that's taken into account by the expectation we have on inflation, because if we know that there will be a huge inflation, well, of course we will know that we will be able to consume less units. So that gives you basically this RT multiplied by the ratio of the price, give you the unit of consumption consumption that you can get from the fact that you invest 1 unit. Okay, that's basically what it gives you, the ratio of this part. And of course, this is multiplied by the marginal utility of consumption at the next period, because you consume it at the next period. Okay, and it's multiplied by a beta term to take into account that you prefer to consume today if you have the choice. Okay, the household has the choice. So basically, on the right hand, if you consider all this term, you have basically the marginal benefit in terms of utility, of global utility of let's say the unit of income that you decided to use to have bonds. Okay, and basically at the equilibrium, what you must have is that the marginal cost of having it, that is losing 1 unit of consumption, must be equal to the marginal benefit that you have, that is related to the unit of consumption that you can have thanks to this investment that you just made. Okay, so that's how you can interpret this equation. Yeah, I hope I am clear enough. If no, you can send me a mail. So this is our second first order condition. We have a last order condition related to the money market. Yep, so we derive basically with respect to money, because now household can hold also money. And it's also a sort of asset, because you can still use it to consume tomorrow, but it's also a kind of thing that you can consume from the utility. You don't really consume it because it is not destroyed, but you enjoy also having money in this world. Okay, so where do we have money here? Money is entering directly in the utility function, right there. And money is entering then as an asset, as we said here, because we can use the money of the previous period to consume today. Okay, if you want to. So if we take this derivative, we have still beta exponent 0, so that disappears, multiplied by the marginal utility of money at the current period, multiplied, so yes, plus, then now we have to take from this, of course, it will be empty only at the next period, so here it will be an expectation then of the Lagrangian parameter at the next period, so that basically the marginal utility of consumption at the next period still, multiplied by beta. Yep, but that's still not finished, because we still have basically money at the current period that is entering here. So even if we have this, we must do minus the marginal utility of consumption of the current period divided, of course, by PT. Okay, so here, of course, everything is divided by PT. Sorry. Yep. Of course, you have to multiply it here by PT minus 1, in the sense that inside this function, you see, you derive with respect only to PT, and you have to multiply it then by the derivative of this inside term. Yes. So you divide also this marginal utility of consumption by PT. So that means basically that you can cancel out some expression. Okay, but then that's what we get from the money first order condition, and if we play a bit, we can derive a similar equation as previously. We must have that basically the marginal utility of consumption must be equal to, at the equilibrium, to beta multiplied by the expectation of this utility that I can get tomorrow, multiply it's PT there. I didn't make, yes. So we can just I forgot that here it is, sorry. Here it is, of course, then PT plus I, not plus 1, not in that context. So yes, sorry for this small typo, but then here actually it's divided by PT plus 1. So sorry for that. Here it's PT plus 1. Yes. So that's what we have, and then if we continue, then if we multiplied everything by PT, then we multiply this by PT divided by PT plus 1. So that's the growth, the inflation rate, yes, plus the marginal utility of consumption. Okay. Of consumption, sorry, of holding money, basically. Yep. So basically, that means that now from our expressions, that will be our first order condition. So to know the marginal cost equal to marginal benefit, it must be that the amount of consumption that we are giving up, yep, minus, of course, the utility that we got from money, yep, because we are giving up some consumption for sure. That the cost of holding money is that we give up we give up 1 unit of consumption as before, But in the left side now you have also the marginal utility of money, in the sense that having money is also a benefit itself directly at the current period. So that's from where this term comes from. And as you can consume money tomorrow, you know that if you get 1 unit of consumption in terms of money, what you get tomorrow is basically the amount of money at the current period, but divided by the price at the next period. Yes, so your money are maybe less or more worthy according to your expectation. You will hold more or less according to the expected inflation rate that you think too. And of course, after it is multiplied by the marginal utility of consumption at the next period. So it's basically the unit you can consume of the money you held, multiplied by the marginal utility of consumption. So it's the same interpretation in a sense as a marginal cost equal to a marginal benefit of holding money, a bit like in the second equation that we had. Okay? So that's how you can interpret this equation. Now you can combine basically equation for second and third first order condition, and what we obtain basically by doing so. So first, let's consider just the utility function. So you obtain one that is equal to basically beta of the expectation of the ratio of the marginal utility of consumption multiplied by the ratio of the price, yep, plus then the derivative of the utility function with respect to money divided by the marginal utility of consumption. So we just divide everything by the marginal utility of consumption at the current period here, and you get a similar equation as what we got from the second equation when we went a step forward. And what we can do now basically is that we can replace this term that you see here, yep, using this expression, you see? And from this you obtain that 1 is equal to 1 divided by the real interest, gross real interest rate, plus the marginal utility of money, divided by the marginal utility of consumption. And I'm sorry, just some note that I had for my research there. Oops. Don't pay attention. If we have if we make the thing look a bit nicer, you have basically 1 minus 1 divided by the real interest rate, that is equal to the marginal utility of money divided by the marginal utility of consumption. Yes, from a first order condition. Okay, so that's what we obtain as a final equation there. Okay, so that will be basically one of the equation of our system that will resume this all these three first order condition will be there, but so that's how we get one of the main equation of our system. Okay, so if I resume now everything that we have here. And if we want to run a Dynar simulation of this model, yep, so that's the final equation I will call it for. So if we will resume, if we resume the model that you obtain from all this equation, we have from the supply side 2 main equations, that is that the marginal cost, yes, at the time t is equal to epsilon minus 1 divided by epsilon, multiplied by the level of the price, but you can normalize that, yes. You have that the marginal cost at the time t is equal to the wage at the time t divided by the the marginal productivity of labor. Yes. You find now from the demand side, oopsie, sorry. You find now from the demand side well, basically, I noticed that I totally forgot to do something. So I did maybe a too simple thing. I totally forgot that in this world people can also work, basically. Yep. So we have basically a last thing that I forgot to do here. It's there is a last first order condition that is coming from basically the amount of labor. Okay, so we can quickly derive that. So basically we have labor here and here. Yes. So that will be quite straightforward. We will have basically that minus the derivative of V with respect to labor. Yep. That will be basically equal to that plus then the marginal distribution multiplied by the wage. Basically, I think I wrote it small w, so I still write it w that is equal to 0. And from this, what we basically just obtain is that the disutility of you obtain basically also a marginal cost equation. That means that the cost of working today basically is the derivative of the function with respect to labor. So putting one more unit of labor, yes, is costly for the total utility of this amount, yes. But what you get from it is basically the derivative of consumption multiplied by your wage and your unit of labor more. You have one more unit of you have one times your wage more, and you can use it to consume, so you get this marginal utility of consumption multiplied by your wage. Okay, that's basically our labor supply equation, if you can say. That's what drives the labor supply of the household here. Okay, so that's the fourth first order condition that I forgot actually. And so we have to add that, of course, here. So we have that the marginal disutility, if I may say, of labor must be equal to the wage in terms of consumption. I will keep this lambda t expression for the marginal utility to consumption. It's a bit less big to do. Okay, multiplied basically by the wage. Okay, so that's our the third equation of our system. So now what we have to add also in our system, because here we defined basically we define the function here. Yes, we talk about the production function. Of course, for a system to work, we have to define it. Okay, so we'll have that our production epsilon t will be equal basically to this function that we need to define. Okay, so that will be a fourth equation, and we will for the dynar session we will define a precise function, yes, to work on. So that's something that we need to add in the equation of the system. One other thing that we have is our identity constraints, that we say that we are in a closed economy, and our level of output can only be either consumed or invested here. Okay. For now, we do not consider governmental expense, but we can do it, of course, in such a model, and that's what basically sorry, I guess I'm a bit tired. Of course, here it's about governmental expense, because it's basically what we did in the what we will do in the simulation. Sorry. So, but we do not consider investment in this world, because as you can see, It's not. We do not consider here that households owns capitals. They are just owning bonds, basically. Okay, so yeah, we don't even have investment here. We just have consumptions or governmental expense. Okay, sorry for the things. Okay, so that's basically what we get. So now what we'll have, what will follow is so six equations. Then now it will be the first the other first order condition. So another first order condition that we don't have to forget is basically that our lambda t is equal to the marginal utility of consumption. Okay, and again then we must define, of course, the different functional forms, right? So that's what we obtain from there, and what we can add now is the other marginal condition coming from our bonds market, our asset. So this was that the marginal utility of consumption must be equal to beta multiplied by the expectation on the consumption at the next period multiplied by the inverse of the inflation rate multiplied by the real interest rate. Yep. And now finally we have our eighth equation that comes from the money market, that is 1 minus 1 divided by this interest rate must be equal to the function that we have for money, the derivative of the function that we have for money inside utility, exponent of MT divided by PT divided by the marginal utility of consumption in the current period. Okay, so that's all the equation of our system here that we should have considered in our Dynar tutorial if we had the opportunity to do it. But yes. So and that's basically the equation that you found in that were given to you during the second TP. Okay. Okay, I hope this will help you to maybe understand a bit in a better way the lessons. So I don't know if you will get question. I don't think you will get question on the developments that we just did now. I think it's still nice to have an idea on how the things are done. We went to these results. Okay, so I wish you a Merry Christmas, and I hope you'll have a successful session in January. Okay, bye bye.